So group 9, I'm Grant Parker, and we did a handwritten notes scanner.
Yep, I'm Evan Manser.
Hello, my name is Emad Eissa.
So in our demo for our project, we have handwritten a couple words and then scan it into the computer, and then it will recognize the words or recognize the letters and then write them into a text file. So for our live demo, does anybody have any words they would like to see written?
We'll let you pick.
Come on, somebody, anything. I don't care what it is.
Convolution.
Okay.
Word of the day.
All right. And now Evan is going to talk about the demo video.
Okay, so here we're going to show our original. Mind press and play again, Grant? There we go. Okay, so we have an original image here, hi classmates. Grant drew that. So what we're doing here is we have loaded our trained neural network, and we're going to run through some image processing to get hi classmates into readable format. Here we have an intermediate image showing bounding boxes around each letter, and the result is hi classmates. Just so we can show you that we didn't just type in there to show that text in a text file. We're going to do another one. This one's Happy Thanksgiving. Once again, we're going to run through the code. It's going to threshold, binarize the image, and then create bounding boxes for each letter. And we're going to show the intermediate image here. There that is with each letter. And once again, Happy Thanksgiving is written. We hadn't figured out spaces at this point, but we'll try to show that in the live demo.
All right. The live demo will be just a second. The image is going to the computer right now. Okay. So as you guys can all see, I've written convolution on a paper, and I scanned it in with my printer just to go to a JPEG into my computer. So I will now run. As you can see, it's saying convolution here, so it's getting the original image. And then it's going through and creating the boxes around each letter and then reading it. So here we can see that it's correctly identified all the different letters. And here's the results. So as you can see, the O's really like to be zeros. When it learned, or when it was trained, they really like to be zeros. So that's one of our big issues. And the way that we figured out how to do spaces was setting a threshold for space in between the bounding boxes. So it's obviously written a little too far and it's picking up spaces here. And now Evan will go through the intro of our project.
Okay, so the idea behind our project was that I assume for most of us, like myself, we're scribbling notes through each lecture in our notebooks. And if you've ever been like me, I get to the homework and I know that it was talked about somewhere in the lecture, something that I need, but I don't know exactly where in my notes. So I'll flip through to a spot I think it is and it's not there. So I'll flip back a few more pages and maybe still not there, flip forward, and somewhere along the way I missed it. So the idea would be to scan in our sheets of paper and be able to transcribe the text that we've written and be able to find it that way. Next slide, please. So we tried a few different things. We didn't want to do machine learning at first, but that's pretty much the only way that we could do something like this with such variation in handwriting. So what we needed is a large data set, because we're going to have to train the neural network to recognize handwritten text. We're going to need deep learning for that. So a convolutional neural network where you have multiple layers of convolution and pooling. And finally, we'll need image processing, and this is where what we learned in class comes into play, such as the bounding boxes and binarizing the image and so forth. Next slide, please. So the data set that we learned in class at the during the last week of lectures was the MNIST data set, which is handwritten characters, 60,000 training handwritten characters and 10,000 testing handwritten characters, but it's only through digits 0 through 9. And when we're trying to transcribe text, what we're going to need is letters. So that we found an eMNIST data set, which is an extended MNIST data set. It has 812,255 handwritten characters. This is A through Z uppercase, A through Z lowercase, and 0 through 9 digits. We discovered early on that there's no simple way to bring a data set into MATLAB. We can't just throw it in there and use it as we thought we could. Basically, it's one giant table with the number of images as rows, and then each row having 785 columns. Now the columns represent, so for the first column, it represents the label of each image. Basically for letters 1 through 26, which correspond to A through Z. And then the 784 other columns, those represent what we need as a 28 by 28 image. So we had to write some code to transform that table into a set of images and labels. So a neural network needs images and labels. Well, particularly what we needed to do is to have a folder for training, a folder for testing, and within each of those folders have subfolders for each of the labels. That means A through Z and 0 through 9, and then place each corresponding image under that folder. Dr. AJ Verma provides a lot of foundational code for this, so that was very helpful. We were able to transform it into PNG images. And yeah, you can go ahead and next slide. We experienced many early struggles through this. For instance, what is a neural network? At the time that we started this, we hadn't really been taught machine learning. So for the first week of our 2-week project, we spent just trying to teach ourselves what a neural network looks like and how to implement that in code. Once we figured out that, we just found the eMNIST data set, put it into MATLAB, and just reading it in, we discovered it was too big. MATLAB just ran out of memory. So thankfully, we were able to discover that there's many subsets of the eMNIST data set, and we'd have to bring those in separately just so MATLAB doesn't conk out during it. So we found that there was a training set for letters, testing set for letters, just the letters, and then same thing for the digits. So we had to run through the code 4 times to create training and testing for letters and training and testing for the digits. Another problem we had was none of the team had a GPU, which greatly increases the speed of training our neural network. So instead, we are looking at, so the subset turned out it wasn't 812,000 images, it was closer to 190,000 that we ended up training. And to run through that multiple times, we tried 3 separate ways. One one training set was 50.5 hours, the other was 24, and the other 7. And whether by the computer freezing or running out of memory, we only got the 24-hour training cycle to work. So 1 out of 3, we made it. And then MATLAB and VPN, none of us had MATLAB downloaded, so we were using the VPN, which can be spotty. So whether it was MATLAB freezing from the large data set or the VPN losing connection, we had struggles there. All right, so now I'll turn it over to Emad, and he'll explain more about the neural network.
Yeah, so the convolutional neural network, that's what we used. It's made of convolutional layer and non-convolutional layer usually. And when it's widely used, as the professor mentioned, in the classifying and recognizing image. So when you have an image input, each layer will spit out. Each layer will take care of specific aspect. Then from the output of this layer, you will have the network will detect which image object you insert in from your database. Next, please. So we use transfer learning, and the transfer learning is taking pre-trained network, modify it, and then retrain it on a new data. For example, AlexNet can recognize a car from other object. But to improve AlexNet, you will have to improve AlexNet, for example, to get the car type. You will have to modify it and then retrain it in the new data to do that. And transfer learning save a lot of time, and at the same time it's fairly flexible. So it was, good choice for us. Next. So to do transfer learning, we had to network layer and the training data, and at the same time to have algorithm option. And next, Grant will take over.
So after we were done training the neural network, we had to then test it. And the testing file, there was thousands of images from the MNIST dataset. But to save on time, because it already took us more than 24 hours to train it, trying to figure it out, we just didn't have much time. So we did 5 of each letter and 5 of each number, and we got about a 90% accuracy when testing the already input images from that data set. Then when we started trying our handwritten letters, we were running into a lot of problems where it was just giving us 1s as the output. And then looking through everything, the image setup was a huge part of it. So it had to be binarized and then inverted. And then to match what the data set was, because that was the only way they would recognize the letters, the image had to be flipped on the y-axis and then rotated counterclockwise 90 degrees for it to actually read and understand what it was looking at. So it took us a while, but we finally figured out how to get it to read single letters on a page. So then we moved on to word transcription. To do the word transcription, we had bounding boxes around each connected object that was in the picture. And then it would run through each one of those images and save it as just a separate image in a folder. So then it could later be input or resized and input into the classify function of the neural network to actually read what letter or number it is that's in that image, and then it transcribes it to a text file. And then at this point, it also looks for that threshold for a space in between the bounding boxes. And in that for loop, it adds a space whenever it's above that certain threshold. So some of the biggest future improvements for this is obviously training with the GPU, just because it will cut down on the time that we could train, and we could do more epochs, which is just how many times it runs through all the image data set. And then one of the other big things is to differentiate zeros and ones when we're training the software. So like a good way would be if all the zeros had a slash through them or something. So it gives that a little more distinguishing factor between a 0 and an O, because it cannot tell the difference. And looking at the training images, I personally could not tell a difference. Some of the training images I went through were so bad I couldn't tell what the letter was or what the number was. And for ones, a lowercase L is always picked up as a 1. And a lowercase I is 2, because the software doesn't like 2 gaps in an image. So it just reads it as a 1. So the 1 would be really nice to have it trained with this little like hat and the leg on it. So it's got a little bit more distinguishment between it. And then right now we can only have 1 line of words. So when after it creates the bounding boxes and it's going through and saving the images, it saves it from left to right. Doesn't matter if they're ones right above each other. It's whatever is the leftmost is going to be the first image saved, and then it's the next one to the right. So it's really hard to understand that in the folder structure when it's saved, because there's no like clear way to distinguish that when you're running through it in a for loop to where you need to write it into the document. So right now we just have 1 row of words, but it'd be nice to get it to where it could differentiate the different like layers kind of words. So overall, we trained the network on almost 200,000 images, and it can now read letters A through Z and numbers. Not always consistent, but when testing, it was about 90% consistent. And we are able to transcribe words into a text document with spaces now. So that was a big help. These are our references. Any questions?
Great job, Group 9. So I have to say first that if I had known how many groups are going to be using machine learning, I would have taught it earlier in the course. There was more of an advanced topic because you were learning even the basics of computer vision, and machine learning is a more advanced topic in vision itself. But I think you guys are ready for it. So we're going to mix it in earlier so you can make use of it in your final projects. But this was great that you guys learned a whole lot your own how to actually use a machine learning algorithm in your code itself. So we're going to open it up for questions, and I'm sure there are many questions here.
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
First of all, it's amazing what you've accomplished in 2 weeks' time. It really is. I know you probably have thought about this, but what about cursive? I mean, do you have to develop a different program for cursive writing, or do you just use the same program but embellish it, for that purpose?
For cursive, I'm not for sure if you would be able to use the same program. I mean, you would have to train it on a data set of cursive letters, but the software is going to have to be completely different in the way it distinguishes characters, because in cursive, they're all connected. And our software right now just looks for a separated object. So to do cursive, you'd probably have to basically think the entire kind of program just
you didn't have time to do that?
We did not, unfortunately. But no, the neural network could be trained, I think, to read cursive. It would just be a lot more processing and setting up the images at the beginning to get it to read correctly.
That was a great question, Sam. Writing recognition, like handwritten, is a tough task, and there's a different layers of things you have to do. The first layer is the recognition of characters themselves, and you guys actually showed that it can be done. using a data set of images and a convolutional neural network, you can pretty reliably recognize letters there. But the next part, which you ran into issues like space between words. Now you're talking about natural language processing, that can you group the words? Can you see the context so that you can tell whether it's a zero or an O within that word? You know, just like humans, if I see a zero, it probably is a password with a slash in it. So you recognize it as a zero, not an O. But normally, if you see a circle within a word, it's probably an O. So those are the higher layers of processing, which you have to then filter out your information. So yeah, you can make it as robust as possible, but then you need all those different layers. Uh, what I'm saying is the 2-week time, what you were able to do and actually train a set, that's a big accomplishment. Did you not find any trained data set for handwritten anywhere, which you
Not that
could
we
have
found.
downloaded?
No.
Yeah, I
Okay.
didn't see. Maybe I missed it, but I looked through a few of them, and this seemed to be the closest. Well, so AlexNet was already pre-trained for MATLAB, and it was already picking out different images. So figured we could make that to select different letters and numbers.
Mhm. So yeah, so there might be some existing, because recognizing handwriting is a pretty big and important task. And if you had found that trained data set, it's a matter of seconds to download those weights and biases for your convolution neural network. It's like in the Matrix movie, you know, you download the helicopter operating and instantly you're working up and running. Same thing here. Once it's trained, you don't need GPUs then, and very, relatively small processors can very quickly run these algorithms. It's the training part which is hard, and you need GPUs. And I think I'm going to should provide those hardware for students for future projects, that you have GPUs available if you do want to do any training for machine learning. Anyway, great. Any more questions from the group? Yeah.
This is Denise. I also had the cursive question. And I can just tell you, my daughter's in 1st grade and she can't read cursive. So it's going to take some time.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
It is very, very tricky. And so I think maybe we just hope that no one uses it anymore. No. Yeah, so yeah, it is not as simple. It's not simple. One other thing to think of too, it made me think of it when you showed your one example. When I was an undergrad, I lived in Germany, and their one had a hat, and their 7 always had that little line through it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would always get that messed up. And so, there's also some cultural implications with, certain cultures just writing numbers slightly differently. A human can sort of recognize that, but a machine, well, I couldn't recognize it. I obviously got it wrong. So even a human can't always recognize it. So there, even like I said, with, some cultural differences, there could be a challenge, but I think it's great work, great job. And it's interesting.
Thank you, Denise. Yes, I think this is pretty impressive. Any other questions?
I had a thought more than a question. Because it's a thought, because for 2-week CNN experts, it's probably not fair, but I hear more and more that CNNs are kind of the primary or one of the main tools autonomous vehicle technologies use to detect pedestrians and bicycles and light posts and so on, right? But these CNNs are like a black box, right? So it's that you train, and it will never be, you can't exhaustively train it, right? You can't train it with every possible set. So there's always going to be some room for error, right? And it's a black box, so you looking in, it's hard to find any knobs to make it more reliable. So what do you guys think is it about using it in a safety critical system like a car, trying to decide whether this is a light post versus a person walking, versus, a fixed light post like that, fixed light post versus a person walking towards the road. It's unfair, but maybe I'm bringing it up as a something to think about going forward, because CNNs are awesome, but they're trying to use them now in safety critical systems like autonomous vehicles, and that's a little scary for me, being used to exhaustively test everything and be able to have control over everything I built.
So that's an excellent question. I'm going to open it up for the whole class because you guys got an introduction to CNN. I want to hear your viewpoints. What do you think of CNNs and machine learning? Not just machine vision, because it's used extensively in machine vision. It's really a great tool to use, but as a general tool, what Osama mentioned. Anybody wants to join in?
I mean, I think there's always going to be some error because, yeah, when you're training it, you can see the loss. Like as you keep going through the same image data set, you'll see your loss and your accuracy, or your loss go down, your accuracy go up, but there's always still some loss. You'll never have that perfect accuracy. So when it gets to something like that, where it's like people's lives at risk, is where it gets really kind of tricky. It depends, I guess. I don't know. If you can get enough data set and you can get it reliably enough to have a very small margin of loss, I mean, no matter what you have, there's always going to be some margin for error. So even if it's got some little bit of loss, I think it'd still be maybe a way to do it. It's just kind of a scarier thought, I guess.
So that's a good point, Grant. And I think you gotta look at CNNs as not like a binary decision maker. It's not like true or false, yes or no. It's a analog kind of output, which says, okay, I have this much reliability that I can classify this as such and such. And then it's up to you to set the tolerance level or threshold level that it needs to be above this for me to reliably recognize or classify this object. It's more of a classification tool, the machine learning part of it. So for safety critical, I hope we have multiple ways to verify and validate the decision which we are making. Jim, you want to contribute? You want to say something? You guys are into this area, ADAS system and all. You're muted, Jim.
Oh,
Yes, we can hear you.
okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
Great. A couple of thoughts on this. I like the separation between safety critical and non-safety critical. So just a brief point on non-safety critical, something like a handwriting device. I see opportunity with machine learning if you give control over that data and that algorithm to the end user. So something that can be personalized, such as handwriting. If you have the right graphical interface to the end user, they have control over that data and what that algorithm is doing and kind of how well it's performing. I think that's where you should put the focus for improvements, is to say, me as a personal writer, it's unique. If I have a way to improve that and recognize my lettering, then that's a lot of value there to do that. For safety critical applications, we never rely on a single input to make a decision. So even when you press the brake pedal now, there's two different paths to get brake pressure to the brake pads. So something that's safety critical will never fully rely on a CNN, GAN, or any deep neural network solely to make a decision. If it recognizes that stop lamp as a cat and makes the wrong decision, there has to be another input to counterbalance that and always err on the side of safety. So I think, though, this is what's holding back autonomous driving, is that you don't have a full understanding of the environment at all times. And we as humans don't have that full understanding either. We can't see as far, we can't see the whole vehicle, and we make mistakes. But if we're going to put something safety critical in the hands of a machine, it has to reach that level of confidence and security that it never makes a mistake. So it's going to take a bit more time to get there.
Excellent observation, Jim. And I think this is a very important point, especially for us engineers, if you're doing safety critical. There always has to be redundancy in how you make that decision, and with anything you're using. So machine learning has a lot of potential, in recognizing an unstructured environment, which is the biggest thing. For you cannot devise rule-based systems in unstructured environments to work reliably. So there you have to kind of have a multi-layer decision making here, using machine learning as one of the tools to identify, and then maybe other radar inputs and other stuff to verify those decisions which are being made, are classified. So yeah, it's not an easy problem. Excellent question though. Any other questions for the group before we move on? All right, great job everyone.